All right. Good morning and welcome to Science Day 2025. My name is Babatunde Abidoye from UNDP. I'm making this speech today for Judge Molina Gray, which is our chief economist that unfortunately got sick this morning and couldn't come to do this speech. But I'm happy to be here to be able to deliver this on his behalf. So this Science Day marks the third edition of a shared initiative convened by 5 partners, and the International Science Council, the Stockholm Environment Institute, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and UNDP. We are proud to host it again this year as part of the margins of the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. Science Day was created as a space for open and informal and forward-looking dialogue, a space to bring together scientists, policymakers, UN agencies, and a broad range of actors to confront a simple but pressing question. How can we strengthen the conditions for science to inform, support, and shape sustainable development, now and in the future? So why does this matter? This year's theme, Unlocking Tomorrow's Solutions Today, comes at the moment of both urgency and transition. As we approach the final stretch of the 2030 agenda, progress across many SDGs remain worryingly slow, especially where it depends on the means of implementation. Financing, institutional capacity, science policy coordination. The FFD4 was just completed in Seville, with outcome documents on financing for development. And there's going to be a lot of countries this next week that are presenting the VNR, including Germany. In the intersection of financing, science for that, and how we bring all of that together to ensure we have policies that can help us accelerate the SDGs will be critical. At the same time, conversations are starting about what comes after 2030. Science Day 2025 invites us to do both, to focus squarely on the unfinished agenda, while also scanning the horizons for what's next. This is not a reporting space. It is a problem-solving and horizon-scanning space, grounded in real practice and open to bold thinking. So what do we expect today? The day will unfold in 4 parts, structured around 3 interrelated objectives. The first is around accelerating SDG implementation through transdisciplinary science. We'll see examples of how co-produced and practical knowledge is making a difference, especially when it brings together scientists, communities, and decision makers. And the second interrelated objective is confronting the gaps in the means of implementation. We'll ask, where are the missing pieces in science policy collaboration? And how are we investing enough? And are we investing enough, politically, financially, institutionally, to let science succeed? Third, science and the future of sustainable development. As we begin thinking about future sustainable development, we'll consider what kinds of scientific partnerships, governance models, and anticipatory tools we'll need in order to navigate an increasingly complex world. To bring those themes to life, we'll first have some high-level opening remarks. Then we'll dive into a set of case studies, concrete global examples of science and AI in actions, followed by high-level panel discussions, all with dedicated time for audience reflections and provocations, and then we'll finish with some brief closing reflections. We strongly invite you to not just listen, but to engage. This is not a passive event. Whether you're coming from science, policy, civil society, or community leadership, we hope today challenges your assumptions and sparks new connections. To open the event today, we are honored to be joined by a distinguished permanent representative to the United Nations. Please join me in welcoming our opening speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Carlos Fuller, permanent representative of Belize to the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Dr. Abidoye. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. As many of you know, my background is in meteorology. I was once the permanent representative of Belize to the World Meteorological Organization, and I presently serve as the chairman of WMO's Climate Policy Advisory Group, whose objective is to provide the climate change process with the best scientific information to inform the discussions at the UNFCCC. It does this through WMO's submissions to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and policy briefs to the national delegations attending the COP through their national meteorological services. I therefore welcome this opportunity to provide these remarks at the Science Day of the 2025 High-Level Political Forum. The year 2025 serves as an inflection point for ocean action. It marks the halfway point towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal 14, a milestone we celebrated together in Nice, and the midpoint of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, 2021 to 2030. At the heart of our ocean ambition lies a simple truth: science and knowledge must lead the way. The Ocean Decade has made a clarion call for a revolution in ocean science, and I am confident that this revolution is no longer a distant aspiration, but an imminent reality. During the recent UN Ocean Conference, UNOC 3, we witnessed an encouraging surge of momentum. 18 countries ratified the BBNJ agreement, bringing us significantly closer to the threshold of 60 ratifications required for its entry into force. Many now anticipate this milestone could be reached as early as this September. The importance of this progress cannot be overstated. Areas beyond national jurisdiction, or ABNJ, comprise nearly 2/3 of the ocean and almost half of the Earth's surface. Yet, our scientific understanding of these vast areas remains profoundly limited. This is especially true of the deep ocean, those mysterious areas below 200 meters, which represent the largest and least understood part of the ABNJ. The BBNJ agreement represents a transformative opportunity for science. It provides a comprehensive framework for marine scientific research, integrating both scientific understanding and traditional knowledge. It seeks to enhance international cooperation, improve our understanding of marine biodiversity, and ensure the equitable sharing of benefits from marine genetic resources and digital sequence information. Crucially, it enshrines capacity building and technology transfer, particularly for developing countries, and establishes a scientific and technical body to guide decision-making with the best available science. By design, the BBNJ agreement has the potential to reshape ocean governance, ensuring it is informed, inclusive, and equitable. On this Science Day, in what we rightly call the super year of the ocean, I underscore the urgency of the BBNJ agreement entry into force. A new era of ocean science is within reach. Let us seize it. I thank you, and I look forward to the case studies and ensuing discussions at today's event.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that speech. Thank you all for joining us again today and for setting the tone for what we hope to be a dynamic, challenging and solution-focused conversation. Following this, I will hand over to my colleague James Waddell of the International Science Council to take us through the case studies.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to see you so numerous here today. I'm James Waddell, a science officer at the International Science Council, and I'll be facilitating our case study segment this morning. For those of you who may not be familiar with the International Science Council, the ISC, we are a global NGO that brings together the natural and the social sciences, and we represent over 250 international scientific bodies, as well as national academies of science. So, our mission at the ISC is to advance science as a global public good, and Science Day in this regard really does serve this purpose. I just want to take another moment to thank our opening speakers, who I think have expressed the urgency, but also the clarity of the situation that we're in. There are a number of challenges that science is faced with. SDG progress is stalling. We have science policy interfaces that are still too brittle. And of course, global cooperation is also being threatened from all sides. So on the flip side of this, there's also space for opportunities. Science, when it's grounded in local realities and when it's structured for action, can really help shape outcomes. And this is where I want to turn now, to our case studies of science in action, where we move from the why to the how of it all. So why this session and why now, you may ask? It's quite simple, really. All the conversations that we tend to have on the SDGs go one way rather than the other. We know what to do, but we're simply not doing it. And this is not because science or knowledge are lacking, it's because we're lacking the means of implementation. We do not have science where it needs to be. They're not embedded where they need to be, in implementation, in incentives, in institutions. And this session looks at how science is being used to bridge that gap. Not just science in theory, but science as a lived practice. 6 case studies we have for you today. They each tackle different aspects of the science policy society nexus. We're going to be looking at things from indigenous leadership in the Arctic, all the way to the role of AI and science in development breakthroughs. Each of our case studies today tie to one or more of the 3 objectives of Science Day, as outlined by my dear colleague Babatunde just before. We'll take it the following way. Our case study presenters will have 5 minutes, and then we'll go to 5 minutes of floor discussion. I really do encourage you to be very active in this space. We're designed to be interactive, so if you have any thoughts, please do share them. As we reflect on these case studies, I would invite you to think about what's transferable, what's actionable, what resonates in your own institutional setting. Our first case study today takes us to the Arctic, a region that is both a front line of climate change, but also a frontier for new models of knowledge co-production. So Dr. Mary Blair will share insights from the International Center on Reindeer Husbandry. And I think what will be compelling here is that it's not just about indigenous knowledge being included, but about shaping science from the ground up. Mary.
Thank you so much, James. And what a lovely slide you've put together. How happy it makes me to see reindeer on the tundra this morning with all of you. So I join you as a descendant of indigenous Sami reindeer herders who migrated from Guvdagednu, Norway, to the United States to Alaska to start a reindeer herd there. And I'm honored to present a case study, as James mentioned, from cooperative research that I'm now doing with the International Center for Reindeer Husbandry, which is based in Guvdagednu, where my great-grandparents are from, more than 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle. In my professional role, I'm the Associate Director of the Center for Biodiversity and Conservation at the American Museum of Natural History here in New York. And I lead scientific research that is transdisciplinary. It employs engaged methods of the co-production of knowledge, weaving indigenous knowledge alongside Western scientific approaches for more translatable results. If you're not familiar with reindeer husbandry, which I imagine most of you are not, it's a form of pastoralism and traditional livelihood in the Arctic. On traditional Sami lands, which we call Sapmi in the Sami language, reindeer herding has been practiced for many centuries. When it is rich in indigenous knowledge, it's a human-nature coupled ecosystem that has historically high resilience to climate variability and change. It represents a model of sustainable exploitation and management of northern terrestrial ecosystems and for human well-being. Today, however, pastoral cultures, livelihoods, and communities are under urgent threat from climate change. This affects communities in the Arctic at more than twice the rate of the rest of the world. And on top of this, herders' traditional knowledge and ability to apply indigenous wisdom to adapt to change is hindered by land encroachment, degradation, and persistent barriers to the inclusion of indigenous knowledge in management and decision-making, which undermines the sustainability of pasture lands along with the ecosystem services that these lands provide. My colleagues at the International Center for Reindeer Husbandry are leading a project called Reindeer Herding and Resilience. This is funded by the Global Environment Facility and the UN Environment Program. And this work focuses on indigenous reindeer herders and pastoralists globally to build a baseline of herders' knowledge about land and pastures and develop the capacity of indigenous youth leaders towards resilience using that knowledge. I'm leading a complementary project that was funded by NASA. For this, we're applying a transdisciplinary approach to leverage both indigenous knowledge and remote sensing data from satellites to monitor pasture degradation and enhance the capacity of reindeer herders to navigate and adapt to ongoing change. This case study showcases indigenous-led models of scientific research, of livelihood and well-being resilience under change, and highlights many challenges as well as lessons for SDG implementation. For example, we emphasize the importance of halting land degradation to enhance resilience of mobile pastoralist systems, and that includes addressing issues such as land fragmentation and encroachment, its monitoring and assessment, and cumulative impacts on biodiversity and ecosystem services. But one key set of challenges to implementation that I really want to emphasize for you today are persistent barriers to including indigenous knowledge equitably in scientific research and also in land management and decision-making. In this case study, we flipped around a pervasively unbalanced relationship between Western science and indigenous knowledge. We were able to apply a model for a transdisciplinary and engaged science that puts indigenous knowledge and needs at the forefront. There are many challenges to a broader implementation of such transdisciplinary science. For example, many scientific institutions tend to prioritize disciplinary excellence at the expense of a transdisciplinary approach. Strong financial incentives, for example, from national research agencies, can provide effective means to overcome this challenge by requiring researchers to employ a transdisciplinary engaged approach and holding those institutions accountable. This case study also demonstrates how and why indigenous communities should and must be involved in the process of monitoring changes to life on land, to leverage their observational skills and deep, time-tested knowledge. Life on Earth is at a tipping point, and we need to use all available knowledge to address this and implement the SDGs. We also strongly encourage the development of new guidelines for researchers working in indigenous nomadic herders territories, or any indigenous territory. Research and industrial projects, including green infrastructure projects, must not be initiated until after establishing a legally binding agreement with indigenous communities. We also call for building ethical frameworks for cooperation between indigenous communities, researchers, and industry, grounded in mutual respect, reciprocity, and the co-production of knowledge. Strengthening such cooperation will benefit all parties and contribute to more equitable and inclusive environmental governance. These recommendations only build on what has already been advocated for and developed by the Indigenous Peoples Major Group on the SDGs. I want to close by thanking all of you for listening and also by inviting all of you to come join us for a workshop on transdisciplinary science and implementation this September in Norway to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of the International Center for Reindeer Husbandry. You're welcome to join us in the core of Sami land and experience and see some reindeer, and help support us to include, make sure that Indigenous peoples are included in the International Polar Year that is coming up next year. And we invite you to come and learn more about how important Indigenous knowledge is to lead effective and translatable transdisciplinary science. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much to our opening case study speaker. That was wonderful, Mary. I think it's a powerful reminder as well that if we're serious about knowledge pluralism, then we need to rethink the architecture of science, not just for it to be expanded, but for it to be truly inclusive. So thank you so much. I'll open the floor for any questions or remarks that any of you might have for our first case study speaker. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you so much. Anushik, Kulamasi, my name is Keisha Talking Waters. I'm Rampo Lenape, so welcome to my home territory. And it's really beautiful to hear not only your personal story, but how it relates to the species and Indigenous community in total. I reflect on an Arctic Circle elder who I've met, Sarah James, who had a moment with me, a typical elder moment, and she stopped and she said, you know, your territory is former elk territory. It's former moose territory. Those animals used to be here. And so what they left us, the calcium from their bones, what have you, is still a part of our ground. And I think pushing the transdisciplinary bounds includes those stories and building that literacy that you speak of. And so I just thank you so much for not only your research, your energy, but bringing that to the forefront in such a critical way.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to anything? No. By the way, I think the floor mics are working now. We'll give it a go next time.
I'd just like to respond by thanking you and your elders and your ancestors for your care of this land that we're on here today. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any comments or questions before we move to the second case study? Sorry. Oh, yes.
Hello, I'm Dr. Anmol Agarwal. I'm an AI researcher, consultant, and I specialize in AI security and privacy and ethical AI. So just a comment from my side is in AI, we see this a lot, the idea of imbalanced data sets. In the real world, it's actually very challenging to have diverse data sets. So when you talk about indigenous data and how Western research generally is much more than the indigenous data, one idea we have in AI research is to make the data sets for the model more equitable. And sometimes if there's a lack of indigenous data, for example, one concept in research is creating synthetic data that mimics some of the indigenous data points as well to hopefully get more balanced data within that. So I just want to highlight that this work is so important that you're doing. And I think for ethical AI and responsible AI, we need to keep in mind that AI is only as good as the data it's trained on. So we need to try to have more balanced data sets. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. I agree with you. There needs to be more ethical use. I would encourage everyone as well to look into the CARE principles for Indigenous data sovereignty. These principles highlight the importance of making agreements about the use of Indigenous data with descendant communities, and that with those agreements, there's ongoing consent to continue to use the data in downstream data products. This is really very, very important, and I think not thought of enough, but there are huge movements in indigenous data sovereignty that can also greatly inform and improve transdisciplinary science that includes indigenous knowledge better. Thank you.
Anyone else? And please do not hesitate to wave your hands because my eyesight has failing me for the past few years. Yes.
Right. Thank you for your presentation. And I'm Beatrice Lee, and I'm a youth delegate from Hong Kong, China. And I just want to ask a question because I know that there are a lot of regions, including the ones that you just talked about, which are actually kind of financially constrained in some ways. So I think that I would like to know if there are any plans of the UN to give significant funds or any other financial solutions that you're planning from 2025 to 2030 that could help actually rise the prominence of AI tools in these countries, I think. That would be my main question.
I would also love to know the answer to that question, but I don't know. I don't know if anyone else knows.
I think we might just leave it at, if anybody wants to speak on that, please do come in. Otherwise, I think we may just leave it at, that is a fantastic question, and we'll have to get back to you. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm not seeing anyone else. Good. Okay. Oh, yes.
All right, thank you. Hi, Mary. My name is Anna Marath. I'm with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network here in New York. And I would actually like to hear your thoughts following up on the integration of local and indigenous knowledge. You started with some best practice examples of setting a baseline, really getting a concrete agreement in place before you engage communities. Can you talk a little bit about what the follow-up process looks like? How do you ensure continuous and authentic engagement throughout the life cycle of a project?
Thank you for the question. The easiest way to remain engaged is to have an indigenous-led scientific project. That will definitely work. In the absence of that, just recognize that indigenous science and scientists are interested and available in collaborating to develop solutions to maintain life on land. It's not only a scientific endeavor for us, it is a sacred agreement with the land that we live on. So listen first and engage indigenous communities as leaders in the project. And if in the absence of that, continued engagement, iterative engagement is truly essential. That will follow up with any agreements that you've hopefully made to work with them. Thank you for the question.
I just want to support your statement. Having worked in Honduras in conservation biology of native variety of corn, it was essential, and it's essential to include the perspective of the farmer. Like, we wouldn't be able to know everything about how conservation happens unless we learn from them. And most of the projects in our case happened and were successful only because we had researchers who were from the communities that we worked in. And they were able to follow up on the project, and they had integrated knowledge in the community. And they made this a community ownership. The science was democratized and was owned by the community. And only like that, it could be taken over and persist over time on the project. So yes, I agree completely with what you said.
I would like only to add that there is some programs in Brazil in which go to the communities and we learn from not only indigenous, but all kinds of communities about the use of certain plants and fruits. And then we bring the technology to evaluate and measure what there is in truth on these traditions of things that cure, things that you can eat. And with that combination of knowledge of the community with the best we have of science, we can create new products also for the whole part of the country. And this combination is so powerful that we are starting with some funds from JAF, a new project in which we are going to have an institute for, not only for, but with the indigenous people creating the science, and we are going only to be the supporters. I think this bridge of knowledge is fundamental to use something that these communities know from the past and bridge and using and bringing the technology we can design. With that, we can create a network and really a transdisciplinary science.
That's wonderful, wonderful. Congratulations on the center. Yeah.
Okay, could I have a final round of applause for Mary Blair? Thank you. So now we're going to move to Doctors Marianne Beisheim and Anne-Catherine Ehlersik. We're basically turning now to an institutional innovation in a high-capacity state, Germany. Our doctors are going to present a coordinated effort to align the work of multiple scientific advisory councils in advance of the country's 2025 VNR. So over to you.
Thank you so much. To introduce our case, it's called the Dialogue Between Scientific Advisory Councils in Germany. It's not by the German government, but it is happening in Germany. And we want to introduce it by also the contribution to the VNR, the now VNR. And Marianne is one of the participants in the dialogue. And my first question goes to Marianne. What were the initial motivation and also the setup initially?
Good morning, first of all, to all of you. Well, it all started, of course, in 2015 when we had the SDGs, and in 2016, actually, Germany decided right away to present their first voluntary national review. And in that review, in that report, they highlighted their whole-of-government approach, because the 16 SDGs are relevant for all ministries. But for us as science advisors, it was quite a challenge, because next to the German Chancellery, there were 16 different line ministries, and all were advised by their own advisory boards and councils. So the structure of science advice in Germany is rather fragmented. And the risk was that advice would be generated in silos when the SDGs are supposed to be integrated, right? So this is why we came up with the idea to launch a dialogue between all existing relevant scientific councils. We being SDSN Germany and the science platform Sustainability 2030 in Germany. And today this dialogue brings together representatives of about 20 advisory councils from across federal ministries into a biannual structured dialogue and exchange with a goal to translate our diverse expertise into integrated policy advice. Anne, you have been co-facilitating this for the past 7 years. During the inaugural meeting in 2018, what were the initial ideas that participants associated with this new format?
Yeah, they were very enthusiastic about the format, also because some of the councils were brought together for the first time. So they were the first time they were in a dialogue. And initial ideas they associated with the format was that, for instance, back then, the chair of the Council of Economic Experts, he said, if all the councils would put like a regular reference to the 2030 agenda and the National Sustainable Development Strategy into their normal regular reports, that would revive the dialogue on sustainable development in Germany. And then others were envisioning that the dialogue could become a platform for them to develop joint positionings wherever there is scientific agreement and also political agreement about implementation. And those were like, the ranges of ideas that were voiced at the inaugural meeting. Marianne, 7 years later, as a participant, what did the dialogue bring about?
Well, for sure, as Anne pointed out, we could go beyond the usual suspects, right? Not just the environmental advisory councils or those dealing with development, but really reaching out also to other councils. And I think it's fair to say that the dialogue has raised awareness of the SDGs and encouraged scientific engagement with them across disciplines and sectors. For example, in 2019, we compiled a joint report by 20 participating councils for the revision of the German Sustainable Development Strategy. And for 8 of those councils, this was their first public engagement with the SDGs, and that later also impacted their ministry. Which is, of course, what in the end we want to achieve. And last December, we again produced another joint report, an input into Germany's voluntary national review for this year, to be presented next week. And we provided best practice examples for accelerated and integrated transformation, and also associated challenges. And these insights are reflected in Germany's VNR report. Anne, again, as a facilitator of the dialogue, what are persistent challenges for this format?
I would pick 2. The first one is in Germany, the collaborations or interactions between ministries are going according to the so-called departmental principle. And this is also one of the reasons why there is a lack of mandate and also a lack of resources for interministerial advice. So this is what all councils basically struggle with. And to define such common challenges across councils, we, for instance, conducted a survey across councils where we were asking the councils what are the specific mandates and what are your resources, also in terms of personnel. And then the second challenge is to sustain a long-term engagement, scientific engagement with the national strategy and also with the 2030 agenda. And therefore what we do is we have the regular dialogues, and we can say that by inviting also our representatives from all ministries, that we keep a steady flow of information on the agenda and also on the German national strategy across councils and across ministries. Marianne, 2 key lessons learned from the dialogue as a participant.
Yeah, first of all, of course, we present this idea to give you our lesson of how to institutionalize cross-sectoral science advice. I think that's obvious. So how to set up an institutionalized, structured format. But having that for me, a key lesson learned is also that politics matters. Coherence at the advisory level can provide a solid foundation for, but is no guarantee for coherence in policy implementation, right? To be relevant, it's very important to also address the political impediments, to quote from the GSDR, the latest version, such as trade-offs between sectoral policies, the impact of national elections, or the detachment of the SDGs from realpolitik. So, you know, what's really going on and is of high salience to politicians. Lastly, it is also important to have your input ready when political attention is high. Like, for example, we did now with the preparation of the VNR report. That really helps a lot. Anne, what are your key lessons?
Again, too, and again, more referring to the design and setup. So my 2 recommendations for anyone interested in setting up a similar dialogue in other country contexts is that such an integrative format is most useful logically in decentralized science policy interfaces and countries that feature such a science policy interface, and in mixed science policy interfaces, so where you have a central scientific advisor and attached multiple councils from different ministries. And then the second one is that there are different ways to support ownership by participants of the format. And we, for instance, include for 2 years or 3 years now, we include a so-called marketplace in the biannual meetings. And there, participants can feature their own initiatives and ideas for it. So, for instance, joint positioning papers, webinars, in-depth exchange, also with practitioners, so they can design their own initiatives. And that helps to create ownership, even at times when political will is lacking or also intention. So when an election coming up, then people tend to drive attention to other issues. So this is what we do, and we try to keep the ownership level high on behalf of the participants. So thank you, and yeah, now for the Q&A.
Thank you both so much. Another good reminder that I would say coherence is not just a technical choice, it's also a government one. So again, I open up the floor for any questions or remarks. Yes, Yancy, and then Sir.
I hope that more of this comes up. I didn't get it, sorry if I missed a point. What institutions or what scientists are you bringing together, you know? And how do you kind of promote politics involvement, like all of the politicians' involvement? Thank you.
Yeah, so who are the scientists involved and the institutions? So there are different layers of this. So the science platform, that is one of the co-facilitators of the dialogue, together with SDGs Germany, is made up of 3 organizations, so 2 networks and 1 institution. The institution is the Research Institute for Sustainability, where I'm working and where part of the platform is hosted. And then 2 more networks, so SDGs Germany and the German Committee on Research on Future Earth is part of the science platform, and that also is like the first layer. And then all the scientific councils that we engage are basically, it goes by mouth-to-mouth propaganda. So like if one council thinks, oh, there's another council just built or just established at a ministry that would be relevant for the dialogue and for the debate on sustainable development, what are potentially all of the councils? So that we could try to keep it open, because alone the definition of like who is relevant for implementing the 2030 agenda could be quite exclusive, and we don't want this. We want them all engaged, and this is why we keep it broad and open. But yeah, so.
Yeah. To give you an example, maybe, the first layer is the usual suspects. And then the second layer is also those advisory boards that have not been talking about the SDGs beforehand, right? Like, for example, the Council on Economic Issues that Anne mentioned usually focuses on economic issues. So they hadn't been talking about the SDGs and sustainable development that much, but nevertheless, they are one of the most powerful and influential advisory councils in Germany. To have them on board and have them discuss with us about sustainable development, sustainable finance. Sustainable Finance Council, by the way, is another council that is involved, or the Council for Innovation Policies. So these kind of councils, those are the ones that really bring the added value to this format, right? Because we have representatives who are scientists from these advisory councils to the individual ministries, transport, health, you name it.
These councils?
That's not like by design, so we would love to include them, but most of the times now this is later stage career scientists, yeah.
Maybe we have to say that the councils decide for themselves whom they want to send as a representative to the meetings. So it's not so much up to us or to Anne as a co-facilitator, but they decide, but it's a good idea to think about that, definitely. Thank you.
I may add something to what Marianne said in the beginning. So I wouldn't put it that for instance, like the Council of Economic Experts, they were busy with sustainable development before, but just not with the transformative notion of the 2030 agenda. So that was a change in mindset that was happening. So they have been before busy with like GDP redefinition and stuff. So they have been busy with sustainable development. Germany has a national strategy since 2002. So that wasn't something new, but what was new was the combination of all those different councils and perspectives, I think. That was really the change in mind that happened. Yeah.
Very much. I am from Kazakhstan, and we have some issues with connection of science to the real people needs. We have two ministries, Ministry of Science and Ministry of Education, and they are not well connected. And people in the rural area all the time concerned that science people just collect data and disappear. And all the time they say, oh, why we should share this data and so on. So how to improve this connection? And Germany is very strong in TVET program, Technical Vocational Educational Training Program. And we need to learn how to make better connection and how to transfer science knowledge to the real people needs. And I'm hoping to expand more college-based training, because college-based training, certification training program, to have technicians in SDG programs, so to train maybe during the half year, 1 year, so to be certified SDG technician, how to develop sustainable program, how to set up, improve the environment, this type of program. Do you have experience of this issue, and what we may learn for Kazakhstan from Germany? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether we specifically deal with these questions, but for example, it might be important to know that the ministries always also attend at least a part of our meetings. So when we have our biannual dialogues, like either in the morning or in the afternoon, we also invite representatives from the ministries. And they like to come because they also like to hear what their advisory council is saying, but also, of course, what others are saying. So that's one way to bring them also together in this setting and in a more informal format beyond the formal official meetings when there are more turf wars happening, you know, and struggling and fighting. So we have long coffee breaks to bring scientists and the ministries together, but also have the ministries talk among each other. I hand over first to you, and I have a second point if you have time.
I cannot add much to your question, I'm afraid. But so it's there are special representatives at each ministry that are coordinating within the ministry on sustainable development. So, and those are regularly invited. But then this, like attending the dialogue, or this is our hope, is also strengthening their position to again then spread the word within the ministry and also underline the importance of the national strategy as well of the agenda. But they have a more communicating function as well as the dialogue has probably. So and this is like the idea behind it is that due to the meetings that the councils bring the discussion on sustainable development into the ministries and also into the content department, so like the ones that are with daily business concerned, and that they make the link so between like daily politics and the implementation of the agenda. So that is the original idea behind it.
Yeah. So one experience I could share is often if you have those advisory councils who deal with sustainable development, they know a lot about the SDGs and the agenda, so the goals. But you mentioned something that is very interesting. You were saying how? How do we do that? How exactly do we do that? So when it comes to the individual policies and the connection between the policies, the trade-offs, but also the synergies that are out there, it's very interesting to have those advisory councils who bring the sectoral knowledge, who are more into the individual policies, and have them discuss how to do it. And then sometimes we have actually exactly these things about how do we train the technicians that then install, you know, the solar panels or set up infrastructure for all the electrical vehicles. So these very concrete questions and how to connect this with the educational issues is one of the added values, again, of the dialogue.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience, and it's a great 10-year story. My name is Fuad Murad. I am an innovation professor and consulting. During those 10 years, there was a huge stress test everybody, you know, survived, which is COVID-19. Can you reflect on the impactful work of this process, this advisory setup during COVID-19? Was it sidelined? Was it impactful? Was it that productive? Or like many other frameworks in the world that failed the stress test? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll hand over to Anne because she was actually crucial for bringing the dialogue online. And also during that time, we had many formats that focused on, I could say, health in all policies, right? So the specific nexus between health issues and sustainable development was our focus, obviously, during those 1-2 years. And I'll hand over to Anne to explain more in detail.
Well, that is in a nutshell basically what we did, and probably in many countries how science reacted to that crisis is. So because we were set out to be an integrative format, this worked very well. Or there you saw especially like all the advantages that, or the potential that the format has, because I remember that, for instance, we had the Council of Agriculture together with the Health Council. So all the councils that were affected in their individual policy areas by the pandemic. And I remember that after that was also one of the national strategies was revised at that time, and then the councils made also some, like the report that Marianne mentioned. They brought together their advice and they discussed like overarching issues and problems and challenges. And there were many ad hoc scientific advisory formats set up during the pandemic in Germany, and ours was like bringing together the long-lasting ones and then to like a current issue. So that was a different experience, I think, in our format, but it worked very well to that extent that actually like the Health Advisory Council then recommended in their following annual report to set up a similar format for health in all policies and other integrative policies and strategies in Germany, but also globally. So that was probably like one of the acknowledgements that the format could be used in different areas as well, and for different crises and challenges. Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. We're going to move to the next case study now. Oh, come on, don't be shy. Can we have a round of applause? Now we're going to move to our third case study. We're scaling up again to a global assessment with deep systems implications. Dr. Pamela McElwee is going to present the IPBES Nexus Assessment, which addresses the interconnected challenges of biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So I was one of the co-chairs of the IPBES Nexus Assessment. So those of you that are familiar with many of our science policy institutions, IPBES, or the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, was set up more than 10 years ago to provide regular assessments of the state of biodiversity, very similar to the IPCC for climate, and increasingly we're going to have more of these, for example, the new Science Policy Panel on pollution and waste. So these assessment institutions play a really important role in terms of being an honest broker, bringing together scientists together with governments to address key challenges. And so the genesis for the Nexus assessment came up in 2019 when the governments that are members of IPBES asked for a scoping and then later the full report on the interconnections with biodiversity, climate, food, water, and health. And of course, in 2019, we didn't yet know how important those interconnections would be when we faced the COVID crisis. And so we started our assessment report in 2021. We were just approved by government members at the end of 2024. And our report, I think, does a couple of things that are fairly innovative that I think are useful to talk about in this space. In general, I think IPBES has done a very nice job of trying to do a couple of things differently for science policy assessments. One is they have a very strong interest in and role for indigenous knowledge. As we heard earlier from Dr. Blair, this is so important to make sure that we're really seeing all different types of science, and we're not limiting ourselves to formal peer-reviewed science, but the observational work that communities do over generations is a form of science itself. And so how can we make sure that that's reflected in our global assessments as well? So IPBES has a number of processes and systems set up to try to make sure that indigenous knowledge systems are also addressed and woven into our assessments. Secondly, it's a very transdisciplinary group. These science policy assessments often started off as physical scientists, and now they've become much more inclusive of social scientists, transdisciplinary in terms of bringing practitioners in. And so I think there's some important lessons there as well. And finally, the third thing I think IPBES does really well is bring in young career folks. And so we had a question earlier about earlier career. IPBES has a fellowship program where even people before they get their PhDs are brought into the assessment process as fellows. And so they work very closely with chapters and they get all the experience of an assessment. They're fully credited as authors, and it's really forming the next generation of folks that are going to be working on science assessments. So those are within IPBES itself. And then I think for our nexus assessment, we did a couple of things that were really interesting as well. And I've worked on previous science assessments before, and the complaint we always get from governments, even though they request these assessments, is that our assessments tell them how bad everything is and don't provide solutions. So we explicitly in the nexus assessment wanted at least half of the assessment to provide tangible solutions. And so that's the way the summary for policymakers and the chapters are set up. And so we ended up with 3 key messages from the nexus assessment. From all of the work we did, we had a team of 165 scientists from more than 60 countries working together in a series of 7 chapters. And we came up with 3 key messages. And the first one is that right now, the crises that we're facing with biodiversity, climate, food, water, and health, they are interconnected, but our solutions are not. We tend to still treat climate policy as dealing with climate, biodiversity policies dealing with biodiversity, and so forth. So we need these interconnected solutions. The second key message is that we have interconnected solutions, that we don't need to wait for some sort of new amazing technology, but we actually have a number of things that we can be doing now. Oftentimes they just need to be funded better, or they need to encourage 2 ministries to talk to one another to do these interconnected solutions. But our report went through a series of assessments, and we scored more than 70 different interconnected, integrated, coordinated solutions that could be implemented right now, often at very low cost. And so we provide kind of the scientific justification and background for those. And then our third key message was that there's a role for everyone. And so it's really important to acknowledge that we need scientists, we need government officials, we need institutions of different sorts to all come together. And one of the things the assessment, I think, did, which was also really unusual, is that we spent a lot of time talking about the process. How do we actually change institutions to be more interdisciplinary? How do they get them to work together? What would those processes look like? And so a big part of our summary for policymakers and some underlying chapters is helping people understand how to build capacities, how to work together between ministries. And so it seems rather mundane, but I think that's actually kind of some of the most revolutionary stuff within the assessment, because we know we need to do that better. So I'll leave it at that, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Pam. Again, I open the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. My question is related to sustainability and connection of nexus to bioregionalism. So bioregionalism is getting popular during the last, I don't know, 10 years. And nexus looks like it's forced system, when people forced to use energy, water, and develop some power stations and so on. And at the same time, each area is quite unique, and so it's some kind of recommendation to develop more bioregionalism, and how Nexus is connected to bioregionalism. Are there some training or program or research in this area, Nexus connection to bioregionalism? Thank you very much.
Great, yeah, that's a great question. That wasn't one of the key solutions we focused in on, but it's certainly mentioned in the report. One of the things we emphasize is that there's no silver bullet for a single place, right? What we need to have is a suite of possible options, because a lot of them are very context dependent. What works in one place is not necessarily going to work someplace else, and what works in one place might have different enablers and barriers than a different place. And so one of the things we do in the report is use a lot of case studies. So again, to be very solution-oriented. And to give an example, it's not bioregionalism, but I think it connects, is this really strong interest in nature-based solutions, right, that we see across SDGs, particularly in the biodiversity and climate space. Some of it linked to bioregionalism, some of it, you know, a little less tenuous. But one of the things that we did in the assessment is look at green infrastructure and where it was successful. And one of the enablers that was very clear in certain areas is when it did link to that larger either watershed or bioregion, right? These one-off projects were not as successful unless they reached out to larger communities, sort of linked to these larger processes that were happening. So by focusing in on what are the different enablers and barriers in different places, I think our report can hopefully give some thoughtfulness to solutions, that they shouldn't just be one-offs, that they really should link to changes in attitudes, changes in how we do coordination again, across larger regions, across, you know, global systems as well, and how do we actually do that? So there's a lot on the process of, you know, how did these case studies that actually worked, how did they get there? So I hope you'll read the report. I should pitch it. Usually I have a QR code behind me when I'm talking, but it's ipbes.net/nexus, and you can get the report there and look through it, and hopefully give us some feedback on whether or not it's useful or not.
Okay, we'll just take one more, sorry guys, but one more here, in the interest of time, I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks a lot for your presentation. Hi everyone, my name is James. I'm a youth delegate representing Storm Thinkers, an organization advocating for high-tech and interdisciplinary environmental solutions. Now from our experience, explaining theories, whether it's from climate science, energy science, ecology, or even virology, to name a few, can be really hard. And it can also be hard facilitating dialogue between experts who have vastly different backgrounds from each of these fields. And I'd like to know, what are some tried and true methods to break these boundaries and bridging that gap? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that we do in assessments is we put people from different backgrounds together in a team, and they learn from one another, and they have to break out of their disciplinary silos a bit. And all the feedback that we got from this particular assessment is how useful that was. So we had teams of people that would be a soil scientist who hadn't necessarily ever thought about the gender implications of their work, but in a team with a social scientist whose focus was on gender. And it's been great to see, not just within the assessment itself, but those networks then get carried forward. And so those sorts of breaking of boundaries through the network that was generated in these assessments, I think most of us that have worked on assessments will say that network and thinking of things in different ways because you talked to somebody that wasn't in your discipline and wasn't in your institution is absolutely crucial. So I would say, particularly to take back to your organization, encourage your folks to get on these assessment teams. Put your application in. Oftentimes they go through government focal points. The IPCC right now is just starting its new cycle and sending out invitations. There'll be this new assessment on pollution and waste, and we need voices that can reach across disciplines, that are of different generations. So I would encourage you and all of the folks in this room to be in assessments because they're really useful, not just for the outputs they have, but for the people that work on them themselves. We get a lot out of it as well.
Thank you, Dr. McKelvey. Okay, so our next study takes us to Colombia, where Natalia Ortiz-Diaz from the Stockholm Environment Institute will walk us through how Colombia has institutionalized a space where government, academia, civil society actors come together, not just to talk, but also to shape implementation pathways.
Thank you, James. Hi, everyone. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here, and thank you all for being here. So, like James said, I'm Natalia Ortiz. I'm representing both the Stockholm Environment Institute and the multi-stakeholder platform in Colombia. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present you 2 case studies that reflect on how science and multi-stakeholder collaboration can support and contribute to sustainable development in practice. So the first case study that I'm going to present takes us to Colombia, where a national platform is aligning different actors and sectors to work together on SDG shared priorities. And is doing so through dialogue, through tools, and through joint governance. And the second case study takes us to Jakarta, where a post-2030 agenda workshop took place and brought together different sectors to reflect on what's going to happen next of the 2030, of this current agenda, and how can we better prepare for it. So 2 different contexts, but the same idea, science as a bridge between data, decisions, and long-term visions. So I'm going to start with the multi-stakeholder platform, and I'm going to call it MSP because it's shorter, and well, right now I'm wearing the hat of the MSP. And I'm going to start by saying that we all know that getting different actors to work together is challenging, and that's exactly what the MSP is trying to do. The MSP brings together actors who rarely work side by side, and so from government to civil society to private sector to NGOs, and is doing so using science as a common ground. So it's more than a dialogue, it's a way to align visions. The platform came from a shared realization. In a country like Colombia, where there's such deep inequalities and its territorial diversity, SDGs need more than policy. They need coordination and they need inclusion. And in 2022, the platform was reactivated. So it serves multiple functions. First, it fosters dialogue. Second, the idea is to share data and tools. Third is give voice to those beyond government. And the fourth is influence decisions. And an example of this is Colombia's latest voluntary national review, who focused on SDGs 2, and through the MSP, different actors could give, who have a voice to this report. So you may wonder, where is science in all of this? Science shows up in 3 key ways. First, in how this platform was structured, because it takes systems thinking and participatory methods. Second, in the tool it uses. There's a growing set of SDG analysis tools that are going to become public in late 2025. And they're going to be public to a new open access platform hosted by Colombia's National Planning Department. So these tools include dashboards, budget alignment models, and methods like the SDG Synergies tool. I know that SDG Synergies tool sounds a little bit technical, but it's actually pretty practical. The tool uses a simple scoring method in participatory workshops to map how different SDG interact. So how one SDG can boost other, or where tensions may exist. So in 2024, 35 institutions in Colombia joined this national workshop using this tool. And the results pointing to SDGs 16, 12, and 13 as the most synergistic of Colombia. Those insights are now shaping the platform's agenda and next steps, and this includes a deeper dive into SDG 16 to identify concrete target-level actions. And the third way science comes up in this platform is that science helps to shape a culture of evidence. And the platform isn't just using data, it's applying this into the next steps and the next decisions. Of course, there have been challenges. One of the challenges is the representation. We want to make sure that all the territories are represented, and this is becoming one of the priorities of the platform. And the other is the tensions between science and policy, and particularly in timelines. Science takes time, and it tends to move at the pace of peer review, and policy needs often answers by Thursday. So getting them, one values depth and the other momentum, but getting them to dance together is not always elegant, but when it works, it's powerful. So that's kind of like what the multi-stakeholder platform is trying to do, and it's still evolving, but I think it's a way to say that we need to work together, and we need to stop working in silos, because we need action, and action happens through coordination. So that's the first case study. I don't know if I continue with the second one. Okay. So the second one is Jakarta post-23 agenda. Are you listening to me? I feel like... This is a different setting. It's another context. It's across the world. And in late 2024, different actors and experts were met together in Jakarta to think, okay, what's happening next of this agenda? And with less than 5 years to go, we're racing to meet the SDGs, and already being asked of how can we imagine the future after this, and especially with the global context right now. A 2030 post-agenda can be just political. It needs to be grounded in science and experience and what has worked and what hasn't worked. So in late 2024, more than 25 researchers and policy leaders from 14 countries met, and they started to do like shaping the science contributions to this discussion. So the idea is that they want to reflect critically in a diagnostic of what has worked and what hasn't worked. And this is a diagnostic that they want to shape for the UN, member states, and also key stakeholders. It was informal, but it is strategic, and so far the work has produced a forthcoming assessment of SDGs, a framework for science-based reform proposals, and early efforts to coordinate science communication. So coordinate unified messages. The next stop of this platform will be in Stockholm in December 2025. And I think that one major challenge of this is fragmentation among scientists. This initiative is trying to bridge those divides with shared timelines, clear language, and a common purpose. So I think that Jakarta is this starting point, but it reminds us that shaping the next global agenda, it's not going to be political, but it has to be science grounded. And yeah, I think that the conclusion about both of these case studies shows that we don't have to work in silos. We need to coordinate action. So that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I think, particularly bouncing off the second case study, it's really underlining that, the future isn't something we wait for, it's something that we build together. And on that note, any questions or comments? Let's take a couple. Yes, please.
Hello, Natalia. Thank you so much for your presentation. I found it really impactful. My name is Jasmine Rojas, and I am a student volunteer with ACES, which stands for Save the Earth from A to Z. We actually have university students even in Colombia. So I love your message about how it's not just about working in silence, but sharing the knowledge that we have, not just with the scientists, but I also wanted to see how is it that your organization is sharing that knowledge with organizations like myself. How is it that we're getting the youth involved and all the university students in Colombia to be able to, bridge the gap between just knowledge and then action? So I'm really interested to see what you have to say on that topic.
Great question. And I have to share with all of you, I'm a communicator. My background is communications. And I think that's the challenge. I think that scientists need to be careful of how they communicate and be careful of not just posting, and we were talking about this earlier, not just like publishing in journals, but to talking to the audience that really wants to listen and needs to listen to what science wants to communicate. So I think that in response, we are trying to do this from the Stockholm Environment Institute. I think that's a process because there's no scientists often does, well, some, but often doesn't have this background in communications, and I think that it's a need to start prioritizing their audience because the message is clear, but the audience and how they're communicating is something that they have to strengthen. Thank you for your question. Oh, okay. I pick? Oof. Okay, you have a question. Oh, you have the microphone? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this good presentation. I just want to ask you, can you please elaborate a little bit more on what did you do or your suggestions to improve this dancing between science and policy, please?
Again, and I have just to reiterate my position as a communicator, I think that the way they dance together is having clear which the audience is. Maybe sometimes science wants to communicate to the same kind of scientists and academia, and maybe they just start to be part of the influence spaces. They have to be where the decisions are taking part. And I think a great way to do it is to start talking to the same colleagues and audiences that they have been talking, but to start thinking in new ways and innovate in the ways they can connect with the action and the science and the decision-making process. So yeah, I think that my answer will be trying to be clear on what the message they have. The science has a really strong message, but if we are not able to share it with the ones that are taking the decisions and changing the world, yeah, it's going to be just for the scientist community. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know you have.
I completely agree with you. I think that we need to communicate better. And I am actually curious if you have seen any impact in trust in science with the communities. And just about what you said, we should be better communicators, scientists, as a researcher. Although I agree with you, it's very difficult to us because this is not incentivized. We are pushed to communicate with our peers in a slang or language that is very technical. And we only communicate through papers because that's how our careers are evaluated. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I'm curious about the impact in trust in science.
Yeah, I agree with you, and maybe you don't have to do everything by yourself. That's why we exist as a professional background, but we do have examples of in SEI of how we're working with communities, because sometimes and you said it, we are so technical, and the scientist community is really technical, and they think that everyone is going to understand what they're saying. And when you use communication to translate this to communities and maybe put it in key 3 words, and it's going to have an impact. And we're using tools like videos and infographics and something and materials that really like land a little bit more the studies that you're making because some things that you are saying is happening in the communities, and the communities are the ones that are living it. And the way to translate this is using different and innovative methods. So we are in the Stockholm Environment Institute, we're working in this, and in the multi-stakeholder platform, we're trying to get together a lot of communities into the dialogue so we can know and understand a little bit more how can we make the message more clear and the ways that we communicate the studies better. So yeah, I think it's a work in progress, but I think that is kind of the message about just working, coordinating efforts and working together and seeing the expertise and the strengths of different types of backgrounds to translate in the territories and then in the communities. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go to final question. Yes.
Hello, sorry. I'm Max San. I am the focal point for Middle Eastern Relations for the Youth Publications and Socioeconomic Forum. And my question is similar to the question that was just asked, but it was that is more of what you guys, is more of what you do focus on encouraging dialogue between scientists, or is it with creating different frameworks for conversation, or like creating like specific platforms? And if it's more focused on the second one, like are there different specific methods or platforms or like methods of facilitation that have worked better than others?
Okay, I will try to answer because I listen very far. But, so these are 2 platforms. These are 2 spaces for dialogue that are working at the same time and that we're participating as the Stockholm Environment Institute. And I think the idea is just not dialogue for the sake of dialogue. It's how can we learn from what has already worked? And we have, I mean, less than 5 years to meet these goals. We need to start thinking, okay, what has worked and what hasn't? And we need to fit like these people that are making the decisions to learn from this. So it's not just dialogue, and these platforms aren't supposed to be just dialogue. It is supposed to fit like real action and translate to the territories where final implementation happens. So yeah, I think that dialogue is important, but it doesn't do a lot of things if it's not translated to action. And that's what these 2 spaces are trying to achieve. So yeah, thank you for your question. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to call Babatunde Abidoye back for a case study that takes us to a space of innovation and transformation, where science, policy, technology intersect. So Babatunde, over to you.
All right, good morning again. There's nothing like a science day. We have to have some kind of a trivia, right? So I have like 20 minutes? No? Who is not a scientist here? Yeah? Okay. Some of us are not. Okay. Trivia question. Is economics science? Yeah? Yeah? I'm an economist, and we always have that argument, and that discussion keeps going. I was asking ChatGPT earlier, is economics a science? And it was like, nah, maybe, yes, no, you know. All right. There's been a lot of talk already in terms of what different case studies. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing at UNDP and how we're bringing AI and science together. There's been a lot of innovations out there, right? From flooding, Kazakhstan prediction to different Pacific and the rest. We're using AI, we're using science to help us advance how we think about things. And we saw also that during COVID, right? The development of the vaccines and the rest that was faster and the rest. But in the development space, we've been trying to figure out how best to use all this AI, right, and all this technology that is out there to understand SDGs, to understand development breakthroughs, and the rest. And for us, one of the things that we work on is on the SDGs and intersection, and it's good to hear about interlinkages and the rest earlier. But if we think about the SDGs, right, so there are like 246 indicators. So think about 246 different people here, right, with their different policies, their different actions, their different ways of thinking, and so many documents out there, right? And each of those indicators, we have inequality policy, we have some other policy on not just energy, but you have renewable energy, then you have this, and since 2015, there's been so many of those documents that have been produced in each of the countries. And part of what we were trying to do 2-3 years ago was, how can we start to use AI and science to help us bring all those information together? And that's what we did with the SDG push diagnostics that allows you to be able to upload different documents, doesn't matter what they are, and then it analyzes those documents. For many of you that are scientists and AI people here, you know the LLM and ChatGPT can do some of that, but helps us to be able to summarize them and say, there's 20 documents, they're talking a lot about poverty, energy, health, but they're not talking about gender, they're not talking about this and this and that. We thought that's very important, right? Because now I need to start to put that together with the indicators on the gaps on the SDGs. So if I analyze the countries where they are on the SDGs, I see that there's a lot of gap on poverty, for example, or inequality, right? You will expect that a national development plan or national priorities or VNR and the rest, when you analyze those, should also be aligned, right? And we see that for some countries, you don't see that. For some, you see that. And it helps us to start that conversation around, why not, right? In some cases, it's because for me to arrive at poverty, for me to reduce poverty, I need to do basic services. I need to invest in health. So I might not talk about poverty by itself, but I'm talking about health, I'm talking about all these other things. So trying to unpack that, and in some cases it's just that the policies are just not aligned and they're not coherent enough. And how can we ensure that as we go through that phase of accelerating the SDGs to ensure that we have that conversation around coherence of the policies. So that's what we did in 2023, 2024 on that we call the SDG Insights Report. And there's like 95 of them online on UNDP's website, where we work with 95 countries to develop those insights reports. And you can find it on sdgpush.undp.org. And then taking from there, we saw that, okay, there's, analyzing those 95 countries, right? We were expecting that, and this was not reports that only UNDP put together. It was with the government and the country teams, right? And there's part of that report where each country talks about the interlinkages, right? So in terms of actions that are seen that will likely accelerate the SDGs, that will accelerate more than one SDGs. In many cases, it's issues around energy, right? It's issues around jobs, right? And we were surprised not to see a lot of climate, right, in there. And as part of those things that are critical and that can also advance a lot of the SDGs. So that's why we started to say, let's look at the intersection of the NDCs, national development, the national determined contribution, and the Paris Agreement, and the development plans themselves, right? And start to see are there coherence in those two. So that's where the NDC SDG Insights report that we're now working on with several countries that are preparing for their NDC 3.0 to help advance that conversation, right? So that when you are doing that NDC 3.0, you don't do it just for the sake of a climate ambition, right? But ambitions that can also help advance the development outcomes in the country. So to do this, we have an AI that analyzes the previous NDCs. We have a same one that analyzes the different development plans. So the countries give us what needs to be analyzed, right? Is it a development plan? Is it a new manifesto of the government? Right? And then visually we can see the two and say, okay, these are focusing on this area, the development plans are focusing on this area. Why are they not talking to each other, right? And that helps with the conversations of developing the next NDC and the countries. So that's a big part of what we've been doing. And all of these reports are online with the diagnostics tool itself, the SDG push diagnostics. That is also there. And so if you go to sdgpush.undp.org, you can be able to find many of this. Right now, we're working with about 20 countries that are developing their NDC with our climate promise work in UNDP to ensure that there's some level of coherence and climate actions are seen as things that can help advance development in the countries. So that's the case study that I have. I have a lot more notes, but since I'm standing here, it's harder to read those notes. But there's a lot of examples in different countries. Cambodia is one of the countries that we supported on the NDC work. And they're just about to finalize the NDC 3.0 and thinking about taking the same analysis to look at other issues like gender and the rest in the country. There's Tunisia, Liberia, there's other countries that we also work with on the SDG push diagnostics earlier, like Mauritania, Nigeria, and the rest, that are looking at these intersections and how you can leverage AI and science to understand complex issues and complex informations, right? Because this 246 and 17 goals and the rest are sometimes harder, to be able to summarize and be able to look at as a policymaker. So, all right, thank you.
With us as well. I was just wondering, how do you see the role of community-based youth groups like us as well in helping implement scientific solutions at the local level?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. No, that community groups are, so I didn't go into detail on some of the work that we do. We talk a lot about democratization of a lot of these scenarios and discussions at the national level. So typically when we go to the countries, you want to have some level of dialogue or conversations around these issues. So the information that we put together is to have conversations. Right? AI is not going to be perfect to diagnose all the problems, right? But it helps us to say, okay, we see all this information, we see all this, let's have a conversation, right? And in countries where we've done this SDG push work, like South Africa, Indonesia, some other countries, when you have community groups, when you have the Ministry of Finance, when you have the statistical office and the different stakeholders sitting together, right? You can start to have a conversation, right? Where on the community side, for example, in South Africa, you're like, oh yes, the social protection, South Africa, for example, is at around 400 rand, right? And the poverty level is at 800 rand. So why is the government not increasing it? But then there's the budget constraint, there's fiscal constraints, there's all of this. And being able to have that kind of conversation in the room, right, is very, very important to get to solutions that can help us advance, right, and around that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Prince Dramina. I'm from Ghana, and I'm representing the DMUN Foundation today. I'm here not just as a biochemistry student, but also as a community advocate who has witnessed both the brilliance of scientific promise and the inequalities of its distribution. So how can we ensure that this scientific innovation, especially AI, are not only scalable, but also inclusive to reach the underserved community so that they can also build capacity? Thank you.
Tough question. So I think on the AI side, right, there's a lot in the UN that has been a lot of conversation on the AI side happening right now, right? We have the AI experts group, and from UNDP side, I think it's, you have to start to talk about the ethics of the AI and how to use AI responsibly, right? But then there's also the digital divide that existed before the AI started, right? We have to have a conversation around all of those things. There's the cost of using many of those things. Like in UNDP, we have a subscription for AI, for example, that is internal to UNDP, right? But then you can also pay for it. It's like $27 or so for OpenAI. That's like more than the salary or income of some people in developing countries, right, per month, right? So how do we balance that, right? And there's the information and data that is being used from all these different places, and the access may be limited. So that's a big part of the conversations now. I think 2 months ago there was an AI conference here in the UN, and there's a lot that is also ongoing. It's an area that is a lot faster than the UN process, but I think we're getting there. So. Go ahead.
Dr. Anmol here again. So I like the idea of using large language models as a baseline to analyze documents, but it's only a starting point. But it's definitely better than manual analysis. Sometimes it can give you trends much faster. So my question is, who is involved in this effort, and is there a way for industry and academia to also contribute to this effort, maybe be part of an advisory board or consult on this project?
No, thanks. Definitely there's room, we're in UNDP, we're another data science company, right? We have a very good team of people that work on this, but we also use a lot of UNVs, right? UN volunteers. And we also partner with different organizations out there. So from our side, we go through UNV, and but then there's also a lot of the academic partners that we have. So we work with universities in Africa, in Asia, in the US to build some of these models also over time. Thanks. All right, go. Yeah, sorry. All right. James is very strict with the time. So.
Thank you. Okay, hi, my name is Andrea Hernandez, and I am a biochemist and undergraduate researcher who works at the intersection of STEM education and science policy, especially for refugee youth. And my question is, how you talked about a little bit of like the possible future of AI, and as we go into an AI-driven future, how do you see the role of AI in addressing or potentially reinforcing inequality in policy development and implementation, and especially including vulnerable groups like refugees? And how can organizations meaningfully integrate these approaches into their own structures and decision-making processes?
Um, yeah, what I can say is this. I think a lot of the UN agencies are doing a lot more now to be able to use all these different tools. I think on the refugee side and a lot of the work that we do across the organizations now, we'll use some element of AI. I think there's more that is being done in the countries than at a global level. Like I know many of the country officers and the governments have been working with the UN agencies to apply these tools at the national level in different ways. And at a global level, it's a little bit harder to bring all of this together, but there's so much innovation in the countries that I think that's where we should go to learn more in many instances. So, thanks.
Thank you. So I see all your questions and comments. I see hands going up like in a football stadium every time, but they stop talking. But please reassure yourselves there'll be time after the panel discussion for your additional remarks. I just wanted to think about the few themes that emerged during the case studies. There were 6 very different cases, but I think there are a few things that we can take out of all of them. The first is that transdisciplinarity is real and essential, but it's certainly not easy. I mean, when I look at the case presented by Mary on indigenous leadership, of national coordination, or on global assessments, for instance, I think weaving knowledge systems together remains a craft requiring a lot of investment and care. The second is that institutions matter. The most insightful science can stall if it's not linked to credible and resourced platforms, whether that's advisory councils in Germany or policy coordination in Colombia. And third, the future is already very much pressing in. Whether it's AI or post-2030 planning, the choices we make now about how we generate knowledge and science will shape what is politically possible later. So now we're going to turn to our final segment during Science Day. Well, actually, not our final segment, our second to last segment, the high-level panel discussion. We're going to look at what needs to change structurally, politically, culturally, to scale what works and to rethink what doesn't. Just a final word of thank you from me to our case study presenters. Thank you so much. It's very much part of the DNA of Science Day. And of course, thank you to all of you for your great questions and remarks. I'll see you next year.
Now I'd just like to invite our panelists up to the podium for the next section, if you're all available to stick around for the next piece. All right, thank you, everyone. We're going to move into the next section of our program today. Thank you again to our case study presenters and our audience for their great participation in the last round. We really want to continue the dialogue and make sure that this is an interactive debate. And so some of the questions that you had, I hope that we can resurface those in the next piece. My name is Anna Marath, and I'm the director and head of the New York Secretariat of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. The SDSN promotes integrated science-based approaches to implement the SDGs as well as the Paris Agreement through education, research, policy analysis, and global cooperation. So today's theme of Science Day, of course, is really at the heart of what we do, and which is why we've been so pleased to work with our partners here today. So for the next segment of our program, I will invite our panelists to reflect on the case studies that we just heard and really on the broader implications for how science can now more effectively support SDG implementation, navigate some of these political and structural barriers that we started to tease out in the case studies, and really inform our future governance agendas. So I know that that's a tall order for a 45-minute discussion, but I have confidence that we'll be able to take a step back and pull out some meaningful lessons for the next phase of our work together. In short, how do we go from these promising examples that we just heard in the case studies to something that really has lasting change? And how do we rewire some of these systems that are needed to really support science so it's not only produced, but it's also applied at scale and crucially in time? Because as we all know, the SDGs are not progressing as quickly as we would have hoped. And so there's a lot of work to continue doing even as we think of the next phase. So I'll quickly first just introduce our panelists, then a couple of my own thoughts from the case studies to set our discussion today. I will start over on my right, your left, at the end here, just to introduce who we have together. First, Dr. Daniel Goroff. He's the Vice President of the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Next, we have Dr. Yancy Flores Boiso, who's the chair of the Global Young Academy. Then over to my left, we have Dr. Robert Dijkgraaf, who's the president-elect of the International Science Council. Then we're joined by Dr. Astra Bonini, who's the Chief of Integrated Policy Analysis Branch with the Division of Sustainable Development Goals at UNDESA. And then finally over here, we have Dr. Ed Carr, who is the U.S. Center Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute. So thank you all for being here today. Now, again, before we kick off the panel discussion, I would like to encourage all of you to really engage in this next piece. And as we've learned through the previous portion, we have a quite diverse audience here. We have academics, we have UN leaders, we have student groups, we have youth leaders. So we really would like to hear from all of you in the course of our discussion. Now, before we get to the very first question to kick off our discussion today, I just want to build on some of the comments that James mentioned on really pulling out what are the key themes that we heard from the case studies. I think for me, what was really helpful was to hear what these words that we often talk about, transdisciplinarity, multi-stakeholder, co-designing solutions, what does that really mean in practice? And here we have something that we can really dig into. Sometimes multi-stakeholder means building the right platform or inviting the right person to really engage at the table. So for me, those kind of simple, achievable solutions are really a great place to start when we think about how does this look in practice and how do we really advance in a practical way. So with that, I would like to turn to our panel now. And we'll start with the flow of the themes that we've set up from Science Day, first talking about how science is supporting SDG implementation and really where we can take some best practices. So from this perspective, I would like to perhaps turn to you, Astra, first, and then to you, Robert, for opening reflections on how this works. So Astra, first for you, from the perspective of UNDESA, which of course works at the heart of the SDG agenda, where have you seen this transdisciplinary science really make a measurable impact on the SDGs?
Thank you, Anna, and really it's a pleasure to be here. I'm thrilled that the tradition of having a Science Day at the high-level political forum continues on. It's really good to see a mix of scientists, decision makers, and I have to comment that there's so many young people in the room, and that's really heartening as we look toward the future and what we need to do to scale up action on the SDGs. From the perspective of UNDESA and our focus on supporting the Sustainable Development Goals, the context, I think you're aware, you've been hearing this this week at the HLPF, we're not really on track to achieve the SDGs within the next 5 years. We have made moderate and some good progress on only 35% of the goals. And this is why I like this day, because it's really focused on what science can do. And I think yesterday in the high-level opening for the HLPF, the comment that science is really what is there to provide the solutions. So as things get a little bit, there's some anxiety over where we are on track, I think the focus becomes more and more on science. It was, of course, with the agreement of the 2030 agenda, even 10 years ago, there was a focus on science and the role of science to push forward the SDGs. And there were several specific mechanisms that were agreed in the 2030 agenda. For example, the Global Sustainable Development Report that was referred to earlier. This has been a report that really celebrates the need for transdisciplinary approaches to the SDGs. And so it's a report that is written every 4 years to inform the SDG Summit when heads of state gather to assess progress on the goals. And it's written by a group of 15 scientists in their independent capacity, and they cut across the natural and the social sciences from many different backgrounds, and also reflecting regional diversity. And so this report has been a testament to the importance of transdisciplinary approaches. And it has, through the 2 issues that have been launched in 2019 and 2023, really set the tone for the conversation to look at interlinked science-driven solutions for SDG progress. For example, there are key entry points where it's been assessed by the evidence that actions are particularly successful at addressing trade-offs that might be existing between particular targets and goals, but also in finding synergies where, for example, an energy transition can not only scale up opportunities and decent work, but also address gender equality, indoor air pollution, so health implications. So really bringing into the discussions how to have these high impact approaches to SDGs. Just quickly, we also support the STI Forum through the Technology Facilitation Mechanism every year. And this is an annual gathering. It's multi-stakeholder by design, and the intention is to enable policymakers, scientists from many different backgrounds, engineers, the private sector to come together and share knowledge with an understanding that building these networks and partnerships is really instrumental to finding the solutions that are needed to achieve the SDGs. And we, of course, look forward to continuing to support these initiatives and some of the other partnerships that come out of these discussions.
Thank you so much, Astra. I think one thing I'd like to tease out and build on, maybe with you, Robert, is this idea of really building from the beginning. We need these mechanisms that facilitate and bring people together if we really truly want transdisciplinary cooperation. So Robert, the International Science Council brings together scientists and researchers from not only around the world, but across disciplines as well. So can you build on what Astra said and maybe explain what you see as some of the common success factors when this kind of collaboration is successful? So what is really working and why?
Well, thank you so much, Anna. And it's actually a delight to be here representing the International Science Council at the UN, because I think one of our missions, as James said, is that we truly believe that science should be a global public good. And I think we all here in this room are united in thinking that knowledge, and in a broad sense, is a source of optimism, is a source of progress, and we need it very much so to address the issues in the world. But I think there's a true challenge here that we have seen, I think, really exemplified in these wonderful case studies, which is this kind of knowledge gap between science and society. It's both in terms of really making science, producing the kind of impact that we require, but it's also, I think, of finding the support base in society for science, and what I call the absorptive power of science, of society, to actually do something with these messages. And there's a quote that I often use. It's from Steven Weinberg, a Nobelist, who said, in science we often learn about nature, about human behavior, but sometimes in science we learn about science. And I think that's kind of the moment we are right now. You know, what should be the architecture of the scientific enterprise, and how should we redesign it so that actually it fulfills these promises that we make. And I think the wonderful thing actually being in science is that actually science itself can shed a light here. It's branches of the social science will actually tell us, you know, how we can connect to society, how we can redesign. And I think it's really a crucial moment also in the evolution of science. And Anna, indeed, you mentioned, you know, two important topics that I think was also coming up in our discussion. One, indeed, the mission-oriented, transdisciplinary science working beyond the silos. But then the question is, of course, how do we facilitate this? Do we recognize and reward the scientists, particularly the young scientists that want to go out and do this kind of different kind of science and work with these stakeholders? We often use the word inclusive, but somebody's told me stop using the word inclusive and talk about expansive, because it's not about how you fit into the system, but how the system can grow and expand to fit those other voices. The second silos, which we haven't been talking about perhaps that much, is the lack of international coordination. Now, as a former government minister, I can say that usually governments suffer what I call the N=1 syndrome. There's only one copy of your country. Well, there are at least 198. So actually, while the science community is well connected and scientific information flows freely, best practices of the science policy interface, etc., are much more siloed. So, and as many of you said, international collaboration is also under pressure. So there's an incredible space to explore if we work more closely connected on those science policy interfaces. We saw a wonderful example how in Germany you're working across the ministries, but I think this could also be lifted to a higher level and really make the whole more than the sum of the parts. And I think the final thing is that, you know, there is this kind of social contract that was underpinning science for, I would say, the past 80 years, where, you know, the public invests in science and then science produces the solutions. And I think, you know, we have to recognize that this social contract is under pressure. And I think this demands also, I think, a reorientation of science itself. I think it's very exciting. It's a crisis, but I think it also offers many opportunities to design a science enterprise that's much more future-oriented.
Thank you, Robert. All right, I have a very many follow-up questions there. But I think first I'd actually like to turn to you, Ed, to talk about that science to policy interface a little bit more, because the Stockholm Environment Institute really works at that, at the crux of that. And we've talked a lot about best practice examples today. What can we tease out from the case studies? Now, how do we start to create the enabling conditions for that final step, connecting it to the people, connecting it to the politicians? How do we enable that to happen in a practical way? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then I'll go to you, Daniel, on the question of falling investments, and then over to you, Jensi, on engaging the next generation of leaders.
Well, thank you for that. And at risk of warning everyone how long we've been here, good afternoon. It's great to be here today. I think I want to take a little bit of a step back maybe in answering that, and think a little bit about the structural barriers we face here. The problems we face right now, the really big ones, are systemic problems, they're wicked problems, they're the kinds of things that resist a solution. And this is stuff that Pam was pointing to in the nexus assessment there. There isn't a right answer. This is sort of the old structure that Robert was just referring to. This has been the standard for action and decision-making up to this point. I speak to this not just as someone who's conducted 25 plus years of research, but also as someone who used to work at USAID advising an Obama appointee. And a quick story on that is, at one point I was trying to advise her on a topic that involved socio-ecological systems, climate change, a few other things, basically multiple interacting, uncertain, complex systems, and I had to use the word irreducible uncertainty with her. In that moment, I feared for my safety. I thought she was going to kill me, literally. But I also couldn't lie to her. There was no way to completely reduce that uncertainty. And this is, I think, a fundamental challenge that we're starting to face right now, is the actual challenges we have to address, and then the ways in which people understand how to address those challenges. And so maybe what I guess I'm pointing toward, and I think, again, I'm maybe responding more to Robert here, is thinking about the culture change that we need right now. If we're going to take on these kinds of challenges, we need to shift away from single solutions toward what I would call sort of a pathfinding approach. What do I mean by that? Well, think of a metaphor here. A GPS, right? We all have, everyone's got phones here. GPS tells you, go this way to this exact point, right? And it tells you the best possible way to get there. That's kind of the metaphor I think a lot of us have in our heads for science and scientific research. However, when you're dealing with these complex, wicked kinds of challenges, there is no GPS. There is no end point that you're going to get to, at least not from right now. However, you can pathfind. In other words, you can say that way is better than that way. So we should start going this way and then evaluate how that's going and then make further decisions. In other words, assess, decide, and take more steps. So that would be a critical enabling condition, but a real question is, how do you get there? Not so much, I think there's 2 points there. One of them is in the scientific community, as this would be a substantial change in how we think about evidence, validity, rigor in research, all of that being absolutely critical stuff to understanding what is good and not good research and what is good and not good evidence. But that also requires a culture change in policymaking and in science policy right now. I'm not going to tell you that the Stockholm Environment Institute has a concrete answer to this question, but I'll tell you that none of us have a concrete answer to this question right now. It is a gigantic problem, and it is one we need to take on urgently right now.
Thank you very much for that. I think this is a good moment to maybe dig into some of the barriers and some of the systemic challenges that we're seeing, which are indeed blocking this kind of enabling environment. And for that, I'd like to go over to my right over here and maybe pose this one to you, Daniel. So Daniel, you're coming to us from the Sloan Foundation, which of course is dedicated to supporting research and education, but also very much the public understanding of science and technology. And as we've heard from some of our case studies today and our remarks here, there's also this crucial step of making sure that there's a popular base for this, that there's support. And so I wanted to hear from you some of the barriers you see in supporting scientific research, but also very much ensuring that it's a trusted voice in society as we're having these bigger discussions, maybe at a larger level, but also on a community basis.
So thank you, Anna, and thank all of you. It's really wonderful to be here and share Science Day with all of you. And especially as someone who's taught in quite a few different academic departments and who's worked in the White House 3 times, I'm particularly delighted to be here and to say a word about the Sloan Foundation and our approach to the questions that you've brought up. So Mr. Sloan was the person who put together and ran General Motors. And he started the Sloan School of Management at MIT and Memorial Sloan Kettering, the cancer center here in New York. And he started the foundation in 1934. His instructions to us were to fund a little bit of outreach, but primarily academic research on science, technology, and economics. So that constellation of those 3 is not so common. And it means that if you're supposed to be supporting research on science, technology, and economics, therefore the economics of science and technology is a very natural topic for us. And by the economics of science and technology, I'm looking at my friend here, I don't just mean the financing. That's in some ways the easy part. I mean some of the other things that we were alluding to earlier about the institutions, the incentive systems, certainly the way that we fund things, but the policy implementations, and in particular the causal inferences that it takes to test actual hypotheses about the scientific enterprise. So to Robert's point about how sometimes we learn about the scientific enterprise itself, one of the best ways of learning about it is to not just say, I think this is a hard problem and maybe we should try this and see what happens. But rather to say, can we formulate a hypothesis? Can we design an experiment? Can we learn something ideally causal about how if we do this, then this is likely to happen. If we do that, then this is likely to happen. And that's not an easy thing to do. And there is a science of doing that economists know a whole lot about and that we can really make use of. So funding the economics of science and taking that view of it is something that the Sloan Foundation has been involved with for a long, long time. And I think that it enables us to really deliver on the promises that we make and on the aspirations that we have. And it's that kind of delivery that will earn our trust.
Thank you very much for that. I want to follow up on the incentive question that you raised and maybe bring this back over to you, Yancy, because in one of the comments that you actually made from the floor on one of the previous case studies was about how scientists communicate with each other, that you're speaking with jargon and with papers often, and that there's this cycle and that's the incentive because, of course, you're producing research, right? But how then do we shift that and create not just inclusive but expansive science, particularly from engaging the next generation of leaders? And how do we create the right incentives for that? It's a cultural, it's an institutional reform. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that from the perspective of the Global Young Academy, which of course does a lot of work to ensure that we are enabling and supporting the next generation of leaders.
Thank you very much. So yes, as an early career researcher, I can only ask that we early career researchers, even those who do not have a PhD yet, are included in any decision making because we're the ground workers. You know, we're the ones in the field doing all the work, and we are the ones dealing with the everyday of researcher. So our voices at the end will help make more informed decisions. I think that we need to stop asking why science isn't used and start asking what have we done to make it usable. So as mentioned, you know, the incentive systems is very important because, you know, as a molecular biologist, I have worked in Honduras in very low resource settings, but I have also been fortunate to work in very high resource settings like a Nobel laureate lab. So in all the labs that I have worked with, I can tell you with certainty and confidence that we are not trained to speak with other people other than our peers. We are trained to just use this technical language and write papers that will be used by our own community and no one else. What happens and the impact of the research, or even like the thought of why are we doing this research, is not even questioned anymore. It's because we need to publish so that we can progress in our career. Because if we don't have any papers, we won't get the next job. And academia has become, the academic role has become like so perilous and such a hyper-competitive because we have this only one path of science that you have to follow. You are a postdoc for so many years, then associate professor, and you have to do this and that. So, and we believe that this is not applicable anymore with our society. And it doesn't serve science and society in the best way. This is driven by a culture that uses indicators like age factors, impact factor, and everything, and that helps universities increase their rankings in the world rankings so that they can get more students and more money. But at the end of the day, this doesn't pay back the taxpayer who comes and brings money for the organizations. So all of this is confirmed in a study that we did in the Global Young Academy where we analyzed the incentive systems in all over the world. And we saw that all institutions measure researchers in the same way in 125 countries. So this is very grounded, and this is how the situation is. So we must realign these incentives, you know, and ask our institutions to measure impact, social impact, instead of rankings. We also need to explore the roles of researchers, you know. We are not only we should not only incentivize publication of papers, but also communication, make science translatable and make it like a part of the society, be part of science communication, science education, or science policy interface. But at the end of the day, a researcher cannot do everything. One person cannot be a researcher in the lab, and on top of that, after working 12 hours, go and write a communication or a liaise with an agency. We need to start thinking of new career paths and acknowledging them, and that these are necessary to create this infrastructure that communicates science with society and government and all the other demands. And this is we need to build our capacity, not only in our labs, but at this interface between science, policy, and society. Thank you.
Well, following up on the first round, I just wanted to give our panelists, before I move us to another topic, to respond to each other, because you've already effectively started pulling on each other's points. But again, taking a step back, we've talked about some of the challenges at an institution level in an academic context. We've talked about a little bit of the financial restraints in other contexts. But bigger picture, I wanted to look, just before we go to solutions, again, on the key kind of structural and political barriers as well at the moment to really integrating science into decision-making at scale. And I wanted to bring in, again, what we heard from SDSN Germany as well, that the politics of the moment matter, and sometimes you have to work with what you have, and you have to be ready to take opportunity when it presents itself as well. So a question to the panel, following up on what we've heard from best practices, what's working, and starting to talk about some of the challenges. What do you see as some of the major institutional kind of barriers at a bigger level? And what can you do if the context is not in your favor at the moment? Yeah, let's start with you, Robert.
Well, building upon the few things that are already mentioned, so and in line with this kind of expansive view of science, I think we need this recognition and support for all these different roles. I think in some sense, the only way to really bridge this kind of knowledge gap is to have many people along the way. So I think there are new roles. I would love to see more scientists embedded in ministries, in government agencies, people who are somehow have a hybrid nature, and communicating with the larger public. And I think it's very important that we not only say that these things have to be done, but that we are also clear in measuring success there. I think indeed, if you are a basic researcher, there are a lot of kind of metrics and prizes and ways to kind of build your CV. But if you want to do this kind of mission-driven, transdisciplinary research, there's kind of a lack of clear understanding what success means, what you need for that. So I think this kind of multidimensional picture, I think, is a very powerful one. And it just means that we need to facilitate many of these kind of intermediate roles and stimulate. It's wonderful to see many young people here indeed, and hope some of them, even those who are doing a PhD or whatever, feel encouraged to play a different role, because you're still part of our solution, still part, what I would say, as the greater scientific community, but you probably are very effective working within these other organizations.
I think, yeah. Ed, you wanted to, and then Astra follow up?
Sure, thank you. So before I joined SEI, I was a dean, so I can speak to academia and to the science policy interface. And there's a running joke at both of my institutions that I should just have a t-shirt that says "Never waste a crisis," because that would make most of my conversations much easier. We are in a crisis right now in higher education and in research, at least in the United States. We are in a massive funding crisis that is both public and private institutions. But that creates an opportunity for this kind of work, and I can tell you that I leveraged it myself in my own career for a while, which is, where's the money? Really bluntly, that's the incentive for a lot of institutions right now. Where is the money? Where can you charge the indirect rates that you need to support the scientific enterprise? A lot of that money isn't living in disciplinary silos anymore. It's living in contracts that get you work on applied challenges out in the world. That kind of work was looked down on when I started my academic career, so say mid to late 1990s. It is not looked down on anymore. Why? Because it is a source of resources for the institution, and you can do good basic research, and you have a built-in constituency for that research. As I used to tell my lab all the time, when you have their money, you have their attention. And that is something that you really want in the world if you want your work to have that kind of an impact. So yes, we're facing a kind of a big challenge in how to mobilize this kind of work, but I would say to all the young researchers out there, you have leverage here. This is an opportunity not to live in those disciplinary silos, but to go do something else and still be really impactful and still be really desired by different institutions.
Thank you. So many different topics, but just to really come back to the 2030 agenda and the commitment to leave no one behind, and this is a huge issue within the role of science, technology, and innovation in supporting the SDGs. And it was a key focus last September of the Summit of the Future and the Pact of the Future that came out and the Global Digital Compact. We see the rapid speed of science and discovery and technologies. AI has come up. If we don't address some of the gaps in access to basic, internet services, close the gender gaps in STI so that women can be part of the group that is informing the data that's informing AI and the direction of technologies, this is going to exacerbate some of the inequalities and gaps across all elements of the SDGs and the types of knowledge that informs them. Going back to the development of knowledge about synergies and trade-offs with the SDGs. A lot of times this is based on data and science that's very centered in the North, but we know that solutions need to be context-specific. It also means they need to be based on a context-specific understanding of the synergies and trade-offs, which the case study from Colombia, I think, really underscored the types of work that can inform that. But this is one of the areas that I think over the next 5 years until 2030 and following up on the Pact of the Future will be a really critical area to further give attention to.
Daniel Yancey, can I bring you up on some of the follow-up?
Yeah. Thank you. So I think that everyone in any field, we all have a responsibility to our society. And again, even in basic research, I think we need to be able to translate, because basic research is developing new knowledge. And the way that we work at the moment, where we wait until the end of the story of the research is published and only for our colleagues, then this knowledge is kind of not completely shared, and it's shared 3 years after. So I think that this is important, that we start communicating or learning how to communicate whatever we do today in the day as a researcher with the scientific community and all the stakeholders, because it's very important for trust in science. And I think that we right now are in a moment where we question, or we should question at least, what are we doing here? Because how can we build trust in science in our society? If we don't have a society that is literate in the scientific method and what the scientific method is, which is just a way to question things and see whether they work or not, then we are in big trouble. And I just want to follow up also about the funding and taxpayer use, taxpayer money use. I think it's very important. I think we as scientists owe it to give back for every penny that are given to us. And it's very interesting that it's actually funding organizations who are driving the change in culture, who want us to change the culture, because they're seeing that the way that science is done today is not the most cost-effective, and it doesn't benefit society and the taxpayer the best? Thank you.
So thank you for that question. I think I want to begin by acknowledging that we, all of us, need some encouragement and some positive examples these days. And the case studies provided some, and I want to just point very quickly to two good examples that I know of that stand out in my mind because of recent experiences. One is IASA, which is located in Vienna. It's the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, which tells you that it's a Cold War institution. And, but it is a place where, to this day, countries that don't hardly have words for each other are able to work shoulder to shoulder on meeting the great problems of the world. So the United States is a member and China is a member. Ukraine is a member and Russia is a member. Iran is a member and Israel is a member. And the scientists don't all love each other, but they work together. There are 600 of them from all around the world, 60 different countries, and they start with really great problems. And those problems then drive the approach. They are naturally transdisciplinary, and people make progress on them. Another quick example is JPAL. So this stands for the Jameel Poverty Action Laboratory. It was put together by some Nobel laureates in economics. It's based at MIT, but works all over the world, and they run randomized control trials on policy implementations. So where you can actually draw a causal inference about whether this policy is working or not, and you can come up with measurements of them. So those are just a couple of examples. And then quickly about this research policy gap. I think that people misunderstand that. And I say, there's a real phenomena there, to be sure, but I say that based on experience, not only of being on both sides of that gap at various points in my career, but also lessons learned while I was designing and standing up a new institution during COVID that really successfully harnessed scientists to help officials make decisions about the pandemic. And the important insight that came from all of that was to start with researchable questions that the policymakers have. And that sounds simple, but it's actually really much more subtle. I mean, researchable questions, not things like how do we achieve world peace? It's a great question, but it's not exactly researchable in the way that you can measure progress and see when you're done. And it's important to start with those questions where you have a sense of a client. And it turns out that neither the policymakers nor the researchers really want to do that. But if you can find such questions, you can really mobilize people. And I'll just say something in closing about an institution to address exactly the issues that you've raised, that we've just stood up to really see if we can't work differently with the policymakers. It starts with an important question, and then we're beginning to set up what I'm calling pop-up journals. A pop-up journal is something where you contract with an organization for maybe 5 or 10 years, and it's addressed at solving that one question that policymakers actually have. And it has a distinguished steering committee. It has to measure the progress and curate the progress that we're making on answering that question. And so that is a kind of a way of redoing the contract, if you will, redoing some of the institutions so that they can make a difference and so that people can feel like we've actually delivered on the promise that we have as researchers.
Thank you very much. I think for me, one of the surprising takeaways, well, maybe not surprising, but something that we don't focus on enough in these discussions is how much some of the general shifts and trends are happening not only at a very basic research level, the trajectory of people's careers, what kinds of research projects are being funded. And I don't think that we fully understand maybe some of the impacts of current political changes, current adjustments in funding. I'm not sure if we fully understand the impacts, but there's a lot happening right now, and we're trying to tease that out while also trying to make progress against the SDGs. So we're doing a lot at once while we have to be, again, building the track for the train that we need to fuel. I mean, you know, I mean, whichever metaphor you want of trying to build the vehicle that we are currently on. But I think that these kind of things, when you think about it at a very basic level of the people who are really running the research and the people who are really engaging in the projects and trying at a very human level to create something and to work in the most effective way, I think that gets lost a bit. And so what I'm very happy with this discussion is that we have been able to look through the institutional case studies, through the lived experiences of all of you and the work that you're doing, and connect here. For me, this is a really wonderful dialogue and a place to take it. I would like to pause here before I do a final round with our panelists on the kind of what's next and how do we make the most of this opportunity, because I really want to make sure we have some time for some questions from the floor. So actually, I will pause, and if you have a question, you can, I think, request the floor from the mic. Otherwise, raise your hand, and I will go around the room. Okay, I see a few. I'll start first, I think third row with the burgundy jacket here, and then... Oh, I think it's because another mic is on, I believe, actually. So I think...
Is it working now? Okay, so my question is addressed initially to Robert. You know, given your past ministerial role, which very charmingly, in my opinion, combined education, culture, and science, could you comment on the education part? And in particular, I'm interested in transformations in higher education and higher education systems as a vitally important part of the overall architecture. And we all know, of course, that our universities and university systems are really suffering from a lot of distrust in the public right now. Can we leverage innovations in higher education for broader innovations in the whole architecture?
I'm very happy you make this point, because often in these discussions, the higher education is almost forgotten. Because the discussion around science, which is then often viewed through a kind of technical or almost kind of engineering perspective, is more easy. But of course, higher education trains all the people that have to do that work. And in fact, if you take these transformations and implement them within higher education, it's a tremendous shortcut, because you're already working with young people. And my own experience is that many things that we here are articulating come very natural to the generation that's currently, you know, in college or universities. And, you know, they are actually much more forceful in demanding this, because they actually want to see, they want to do something. They are in this unfortunate situation where they are probably picking up the signals and living much more in the here and now than we are. Whereas they have very little instruments to actually do something about it. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And as you say, you know, there's certainly also a crisis in public support of higher education. It's often seen as elitist, as disconnected from the real world. Very different what I feel if I talk to students. So it's absolutely crucial to engage them and have them part of the discussion, because, you know, I feel sometimes this tendency to somehow cut science from its higher education base is, you know, very detrimental.
I'll just go to the next question, actually, because there were a number of hands raised. I'll go back to, I think, the next hand that I saw trying to make eye contact there. I'm sorry, apologies for pointing. In the burgundy jacket there, you had your mic on before. Did you still want to speak? No? Okay. James, can I have you help me pick out who was first? Let's see, somebody who hasn't spoken. Let's go here with the glasses in the third row there. Yep.
Hi, thank you. I'm Carrie Chance, a professor at the University of Bergen in Norway and from the Habitable Air Project. The ambassador mentioned providing the best scientific evidence possible amid a shifting social contract on science. And among the challenges of our research team of qualitative and quantitative scientists working on wildfire and air pollution issues in the context of the United States is media literacy. And note, I don't mean awareness about science and scientific issues, and indeed misinformation, notably about climate, sustainability, about health, combined with a lack of political will, as well as funding cuts at multiple levels of government, which diminishes the implementation and multilateral cooperation on the SDGs. So my question for you and really all the panelists today is, how do we as scientists and citizens grapple with this kind of rising polarization alongside increasing challenges of distinguishing and in relation to AI and unequal access to infrastructure and information, forward what is the best scientific evidence? And how does indigenous science and grassroots community-based knowledge navigate this perilous time, especially when we seek to add local knowledge, but not just add local knowledge and stir, but have a kind of sustained and serious engagement in co-production with communities across borders and boundaries, disciplinary and otherwise. And in this new social contract, I sort of want to celebrate this science policy interface, while as a panelist sort of noted taking pause with the position of an alignment with practical, applied or governmental imperatives of what science is or science is not, especially when democratization and democratic institutions are facing such challenges in various parts of the globe. So thank you for your interventions, and it's just trying to draw some threads between the different points that have been made. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that multifaceted question. Perhaps to start with the question about misinformation and ensuring that science is communicated as a trusted actor and a trusted voice. Maybe Daniel, could I turn to you first on that question, as it follows up on some of the questions that you were talking to earlier?
First of all, we're just beginning to do research on the misinformation and the roles of new technologies in doing that. Misinformation has been around for a very long time. And to the extent that we can explain what we do clearly and not jump to conclusions, be able to give the evidence in a way that's convincing, I think that can go a long way. We need to study these new technologies. We need to regulate some of these new technologies, and have a convincing counter-narrative. I mean, the stories matter. And at the Sloan Foundation, one of the things that we do in our public understanding program is not to produce so many documentaries or anything else like that, but to tell stories. And so if you've seen the film Hidden Figures, or if you've seen some of the other films about great scientists, or look out for Photograph 51. If you haven't heard of the play, it'll soon be a movie. These are things about the lives of scientists. They offer a different kind of narrative. They appeal very broadly because they're really good stories. And I think that we need to keep on trying to put our best face forward and make sure that people hear that too.
Were there any other follow-ups in that particular question, Ed?
A total agreement with that. Just a super quick point. I think that, as we just heard, communication is a skill. I don't think we're trained to respect people who have that as a skill. We, academia, often, and not even academia, science policy, those of us who do research, often we are people who are very, very smart about specific things, but are trained to think we're smart about everything. And we're not necessarily smart about communications, whereas we have people who spend a lot of their lives and careers really learning how to do that work, tell those stories as we just heard. And I think we need to bring more of those people into this conversation and into our work. I mean, as Jensi said earlier, we can't do all of it ourselves. So maybe prioritizing some of that would help us quite a bit.
Just in terms of higher education, it's also like interrelated about, you know, how AI is coming in and everything, and the role of how we think in science is development of critical thinking skills, that are essential. So I think that it's something that has to do on how we link education and science and the basic scientific skills, which are like really what we are as scientists, just questioning things in a moderated way, something like that. Thanks.
So perhaps very briefly, I think one thing I find kind of optimistic is that if you see how to build more trust in science, it's often people do, if they trust anyone, it's the individual scientist. So I think actually the topic that we have been discussing here, the mission-driven, working with stakeholders, means also that people see real scientists at work, and the distrust is often in institutions and agencies, etc. So I think there's really an opportunity here to bring this kind of human face to science, but also, of course, this demands something from the scientific community, which is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think perhaps that requires, again, the kind of incentives that actually kind of stimulate and reward those efforts. But I think that's really what we have to do.
I think we have time for just one more, but it will have to be, I'm afraid, brief. Especially, do we have something, not to guide your questions too much, I would also like to bring our discussion back to, again, the implementation on the SDG agenda, because here we are talking at HLPF about progress and application and ensuring that science is connecting to the urgent areas where we need to act. So I wonder if we have one final question, which can relate back to that theme. Gentleman here in the third row there, go ahead.
My question is directed to Robert. So you spoke about moving beyond the idea of simply fitting into the scientific ecosystem, and I agree. But I also believe that before we can transcend inclusion, we must first embrace our own relevance in contributing to this system. As the SDGs, we are all focusing on how to include everyone into the system. So if those with enormous potential, particularly individuals and communities who are under-resourced and are left out, then how do we aim to expand the science we are talking about? Thank you.
Well, I think some of the other panelists should also reflect on this, but you really are underlining the point of the inequality, right? And one of the overarching, I think, dilemmas is, certainly with the SDGs, is that those countries, that regions that have to make the toughest decision, that have the least resources and capacity also to make kind of science-informed decisions. So I think here, at least, international collaboration can be part of the solution. But as you said, it's also providing a sense of equity in the various kinds of knowledge and work with, because I think in some sense, every region of the world has a wonderful research of knowledge. Citizens know about their own lives, about their own countries, about their own regions. So we can tap into that. So I think if the science community itself widens, etc., that provides lots of opportunities. And then I think, again, I would say fully in the spirit of science, work as a global community.
Thank you for this really excellent question, and it goes to the heart of how do you ensure that science and technology innovation are supporting progress in all settings. And I would just mention that for the STI Forum this year, we did a call for innovations from low resource settings, and we had over 300 submissions from youth in low resource settings who had developed really incredible innovations based on the science and in their countries. And they came to New York and had an opportunity to network and showcase those solutions, which included things like a mental health, AI-driven mental health service for refugees developed by an innovator from Turkey, and then using invasive seaweed species for developing biodegradable products in Kenya. So these were really specific and solution-oriented, and it was something I think we can do more of highlighting some of those solutions and innovations that are being developed in lots of different spaces. But also just to say, open science hasn't really come up that much, and it's such a critical part of ensuring that when knowledge is available, everyone has access to it. And that's a huge issue with both language barriers in terms of publications and paywalls in accessing the latest science and knowledge. So this is another area when we look ahead that we can give a bit more attention to how to ensure that that is accessible.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid that we are going to have to move on to our closing segment. It's just a shame because there were so many good thoughts and your hands were raised, and I'm afraid we didn't get to everybody today. But we do have to move on, and I think this just shows the need for perhaps a more extended Science Day in the coming year. Maybe we need to go back to a science year, a science decade. But really, I want to thank again my panels also for prompting the discussion about how do we reframe. It's not simply about one solution here, but we're really thinking about big architectural shifts here. And with that, just to thank again our panel, Ed Carr, Astro Bonini, Robert Dykerath, Yancy Flores, Bueso Flores, and Daniel Goroff. Thank you so much for your time there. And now I would like to hand over to Astro Bonini from UNDESA for our closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you to everyone. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. We have a closing speaker and also a closing lead discussant. You can please come to the podium.
And Robert now? Robert, now I'm you.
Well, thank you to all of the colleagues for being with us through what has really been an exciting 3-hour session with some excellent case studies that are presented, really inspiring speakers, and a really impressive space for sharing different ideas. It's very difficult to distill all of these, but we are here and really have the pleasure now of hearing from our closing speaker with a rich experience in scaling up STI impact on SDG implementation at a national level. It's my honor to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Lamin Baba Diba, the permanent representative of the Gambia to the United Nations. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. It is indeed a profound honor to address this esteemed gathering on the occasion of Science Day 2025, held under the theme Unlocking Tomorrow's Solutions Today. At this pivotal moment in our global development journey, the role of science and technology has never been more indispensable. As we approach the end of 2030 agenda, the world faces increasingly complex and interlinked challenges from climate change, food insecurity, digital inequality, and global health threats. Yet, as these crises intensify, the window of opportunity to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals continues to narrow. As we all know in this room, we're only 17% achieved. The 83%, how do we energize ourselves from national level to continental level to global level? How do we energize ourselves to be able to achieve this 83% outstanding when we have only 5 years to go? Ladies and gentlemen, for the Gambia, the SDGs are not abstract ambitions. They represent daily aspirations of our people. Access to quality education. Somebody talked here about higher education. Reliable health care, food security, clean and affordable energy. Despite our firm commitment to the 2030 agenda, we face persistent structural barriers, particularly in financing, technical capacity, and institutional development that impede the pace and scale of our progress. In this context, Madam Chair, science must be more than a driver of innovation. It must become a catalyst of justice, equity, and transformative change. For us, impactful science is transdisciplinary, inclusive, and grounded in lived experiences of our communities. When diverse knowledge systems, from traditional ecological practices to advanced digital tools, are brought together, transformative change becomes not only possible, but enduring. In the Gambia, for example, blending indigenous knowledge with modern climate modeling has enhanced early warning system, while mobile-based health surveillance has significantly improved disease monitoring in remote areas, particularly during pandemic recovery. Madam Chair, to accelerate such impact, we must strengthen inclusive and resilient digital infrastructure. These include expanding broadband access, ensuring consistent electricity supply, improving the affordability and accessibility of digital devices. Without these fundamental elements, the promise of digital innovation will remain out of reach for many in the developing world. Equally critical is the investment, which is very crucial, investment in digital literacy and capacity building. Comprehensive training programs must be designed to equip educators, researchers, and students with essential digital competencies. These include practical instruction in the use of digital tools, cybersecurity awareness, online research methods, enabling all participants in the scientific ecosystem to contribute meaningfully to sustainable development. Although there are promising examples of science-informed policies, these remain fragmented and uneven. Too often, countries like my country, the Gambia, are treated as passive recipients of knowledge rather than as co-creators of global solutions. We continue to grapple with significant gaps in research infrastructure, technological access, and integration into global scientific networks. Our institutions are under-resourced, our scientists underrepresented. These disparities are symptomatic of broader development challenges that must be addressed to translate ambition into meaningful action. The Gambia calls for a more inclusive and democratic global science policy interface, bridging the gap between innovation and impact demands more than technology transfer. It requires sustained, I must emphasize, sustained investment in building scientific capacities that are resilient, locally driven, and aligned with national priorities. Emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and biotechnology holds immense potential, but their governance must be inclusive and globally representative. Transparency, ethical standard, and open access to data are essential to building equity and trust in science. What we are emphasizing here, AI is the big elephant in the room. But how do we ensure that we are included but as well as develop capacities. And that requires cooperation with countries that have already acquired the capacity. We also emphasize the importance of aligning national science, technology, and innovation STI strategies with regional frameworks, harmonization in areas such as data sharing, intellectual property rights, and digital education will help accelerate this progress. In this regard, the Gambia actively contributes to regional initiatives that promote climate-smart agriculture, digital tools for education and health, and the development of inclusive knowledge network. We have just recently launched our science and technology policy, and this is the basis for our involvement into inculcating research, science and technology as a leverage to leapfrog the achievement of the SDG goals. Nonetheless, persistent challenges such as limited infrastructure, insufficient investment in research and development. In OECD countries, they're spending not less than 1% of their GNP in research. But you look at the other side of the world, the southern part, we're investing less than 1% in research and development. And research is the basis that informs policy. Without research, it would be difficult to have an informed policy. So therefore, it is important for us to collaborate and see how best we can bring this together. To overcome this barrier, South-South and triangular cooperation must be leveraged to localize solutions, foster responsible digital governance, and ensure STIs strengthens both resilience and shared prosperity. We urge increased investment in digital skills, particularly for youth, women, and micro-enterprises, and call for stronger regional research partnerships and open source innovation rooted in local realities. However, technical solutions alone will not suffice. Science operates within a broader political and economic context that is currently under immense strain. Shrinking fiscal space, rising debt burdens across the global south, and liquidity challenges at all levels constrain our collective capacity to achieve the SDGs. Financing scientific systems in developing countries must be viewed not as an act of charity, but as a strategic investment in global resilience building. Strong, credible, and well-resourced scientific institutions in the global south are essential to building climate adaptation strategies, improving food systems, anticipating future crises, and managing shared risks. As we push forward to the 2030 agenda, we must also cast our gaze beyond it. The post-2030 development era will demand science that is not only innovative, but also inclusive, ethical, and responsive to evolving needs of humanity. It will require institutions that are transparent, trustworthy, and grounded in public good, because unchecked development of technology can lead to wiping out of Homo sapien man. It will require institutions that are transparent, Global South ensuring that our voices, experiences, and priorities inform the decisions that will define our shared future. For the Gambia, the path forward lies in reimagining science as a collaborative, interdisciplinary, interregional, and intergenerational pursuit. Africa's youth must be empowered, not merely as beneficiaries of innovation, but as co-creators. Through enhanced South-South and triangular cooperation, we can build inclusive ecosystem of research and innovation that reflect our unique development priorities. As we embrace the future of technology, we must also preserve the ethical, cultural, and social dimension that gives science its legitimacy and purpose. In concluding, Madam Chair, we must confront the realities that shape our world today. Rising geopolitical tensions, weakened multilateralism, and growing public distrust in institutions threaten not only our development goals, but the very integrity of science itself. In this context, science must be remained rigorous and evidence-based, but also transparent, inclusive, and deeply connected to the needs of society. It must serve as a bridge, not as a barrier. The Gambia believes that unlocking tomorrow's solution will require more than technological breakthrough. It will take political will, inclusive governance, and renewed global solidarity. As a small country with bold aspirations, we remain fully committed to working alongside our partners across government, academia, and civil society to ensure that the knowledge we generate today forms the foundation of a just, resilient, and sustainable world. This is our shared moment, not only to reflect on the world as it is, but to imagine what can become when science reflects the voices and values of all. I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that truly, I think, inspiring statement that sums up both the challenges that we're facing, but also the immense opportunities. And you pointed to so many examples of activities that are taking place in the Gambia that really show the vast potential with a little more support, investment, networks of capacity building, and showcasing the immense potential of bringing a stronger science support system to these countries. We are now honored to have a closing lead discussant, Dr. Marcia Barbosa. Dr. Barbosa is Vice President for Freedom and Responsibility in Science at the International Science Council and has a wealth of experience on the potential for science in society. Dr. Barbosa, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. The International Science Council wants to be this voice for global science. Global? This is a strong word. When you think about science, we think about answering questions. Who is making the question? Who is answering those questions? Today, in the first part of this meeting, we heard about a few examples in which emphasize that multidisciplinary should be the process of answering the questions. And you heard questions that were addressed by indigenous, and I might end up also local communities, questions that are addressed to councils, to governments, to populations in the design that become multidisciplinary because the questions is being answered by many groups. I didn't hear about who is making the questions, who is designing the questions. Why this is so important? Because the majority of science players are in the global north. And the global north are the ones making the questions. And when you give an answer that serves part of the planet and not the other part of the planet, we have a problem with the SDGs because we give solutions that don't work. I will give an example. We have lack of fresh water in the Amazon. The region have more water. The water is not proper for drinking because they don't have energy for cleaning this water. And the solution, the common solution would say, well, you have sun, you should put solar panels there. Where? You are in the jungle. Are you going to put the solar panels in the top of the trees? This is an example how when you design a solution that is not addressing the local issues, we are designing a wrong solution. We have challenges in many parts of the planet in which we have one goal that's going against the other goal. For example, how do you end poverty if the only model of the development that have been so far produced developed countries is burning CO2? So the first challenge we have, and maybe we should bring that as a homework, which model of development, new model of development, should we design for being able to, in 2030, win all these challenges and yet have developed countries in the planet? So let us look to other parts and invite people to design together the question and not only the solution. But to do that, we are going to have two major barriers. The first barrier is that we have an academic system that is not multidisciplinary, is not designed to make questions that are made by certain parts of the planet. So we need to hear, we need to redesign, and this is huge dangers because we are very much afraid to lose the baby with the baby water. We are afraid. We have a system working, at least for some people, and we need to redesign it without losing it. And this is a challenge needed for science, that science can do. And to do that, instead of only talking with the usual people that give us the money, governments and private funding, we should talk with the people. And this gives us the question of communication. We need to change communication, and should be science-based communication. We need to start to ask science how we communicate efficiently and professionally. And we are not doing that. We think that you take a phone and you start to communicate. I have bad news for you. The people that are against science are doing that professionally. They are using science against science. We should use science to support science. And one major ingredient in that is that instead of only talking, we need to listen to the people we are talking. Otherwise, we are going to preach only for people that agree already with us. We need to listen. We need to use science. You need to communicate. And also, you need to ask the people questions, not only the usual people that make the questions. Questions answered, multidisciplinary. This is the ingredient we learned today, and we need to implement. It's hard. It's hard. But we can do that if science is together. And I think International Science Council can be an instrument to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barbosa. And I think the idea of giving us homework for next year, when we have hopefully another chance to gather for Science Day at the HLPF, is a wonderful idea. I just want to give a final word of gratitude to our co-conveners, the International Science Council, the Stockholm Environment Institute, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and UNDP for making this platform possible, and really to thank all of you, participants, presenters, and colleagues who joined from around the world and in person and online. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.